everybody. If we get started. Well, welcome, everybody. Welcome to tonight's meeting. Thank you for coming out on the cold Wednesday night. My name is Dave Smith. I'm the Assistant Administrator of the Bureau of Turnpikes for the New Hampshire DOT. Have with me here tonight Marty Kennedy. Going to be giving you folks a presentation on the I-293 Exit 6 and 7 Transportation Planning Study. We've been at this now for, what, a year and a half, Marty, reaching out to you folks, progressing through the study. Tonight's meeting is a culmination of our first phase of effort in studying these two interchanges along I-293. And the goal of tonight's meeting is to provide you with our findings, to solicit input from you folks, to hear what's critical and crucial to you folks as we progress through and forward, and to make sure we're going down the right path as we proceed to the next phases. Marty will give a detailed presentation of their findings, what VHB has found as far as the interchange alternatives, the critical issues, and so forth. We'll have a question and answer period after Marty gets through his presentation. So without further delay, let's get right into this. We don't keep anybody here too much longer after the presentation. So Marty, take it away.
Thanks, Dave. As Dave said, my name is Marty Kennedy. I'm with the engineering firm of Van Ness, Hang & Brusselin. This is our fifth public meeting. What I'm going to do is, at least early on in the presentation, I'm going to recap some of the information that was presented at the earlier meetings. But I am going to move through that fairly quickly because I want to get to have a good discussion on the alternatives and the evaluation of the alternatives, and ultimately our findings and what the next steps are. Where do we go from here? So forgive me if I go a little fast early on in the presentation, but I want to leave enough time to talk about the alternatives and our findings. So let me just step into this. Study purpose, we talk about this at each meeting. The purpose of this planning study is to consider transportation system modifications aimed at addressing capacity and safety related deficiencies along the main line and at the interchanges, exit 6 and 7, for about a 3-mile segment of I-293, including consideration of relocating and reconfiguring exit 7 into a fully directional interchange. This is our study area. In red is shown I-293. It runs from, on the left-hand side is south, running to north on the right-hand side. Our study area basically starts just north of exit 5. Exit 5 is just off the photo here, and it extends through exit 6. This is where Amoskeag Street is. Moving to the north where Front Street comes in, this is the existing exit 7. The landfill, Manchester Community College, is located at this point. And there's an area right up in here where we're looking at alternatives to potentially relocate exit 7. We've been working very closely with the Technical Advisory Committee. They've been very helpful to us throughout the process. On that committee included not only the New Hampshire Department of Transportation and the Federal Highway Administration, but also representatives from the Southern New Hampshire Planning Commission, representatives of the City of Manchester, the Town of Goffstown, Town of Hooksett, the Greater Manchester Chamber of Commerce, the Hooksett Chamber of Commerce, the Manchester Community College, and also Senator Booten sits on that committee. Throughout the study, we've really tried to focus on public outreach and provide as much information as possible. And in doing that, as I said, we've had 5 public informational meetings. So this is our 5th and final meeting for this planning study. We also met 9 times with the Technical Advisory Committee. And then we had a series of just sort of briefings with each of the communities, which included, we met once with the Hooksett Town Council, once with the Manchester Board of Mayor and Aldermen, once with the Goffstown Selectmen. We had a brief presentation before the Infrastructure Committee at the Greater Manchester Chamber of Commerce. And we've also had a couple of meetings with the Southern New Hampshire Planning Commission. Again, just to share information as we're moving through the study. As part of that, we have a project website. This website has actually been very helpful to us, not only to put information on it so the public can look at it, but we were also, what was very useful was people were able to ask questions and submit their ideas to us through the website. And so that worked out actually very well. On the website, we had such information as an interactive map where you could actually look at the alternatives and call up different resources and so forth. And prior to the last meeting, we had a meeting in the summer where we actually went through all the alternatives, and prior to that meeting, we put out a newsletter which described all the alternatives, and I think that was useful because people had an opportunity to kind of get a sense of what the alternatives were prior to the meeting. Anyway, let me step through, before I talk about the alternatives, some of the initial data and information that we have collected. First off, back at the very beginning of the study, I talked about how we had gone out and collected traffic volume counts, both during the morning peak periods and the evening peak periods, at about 24 intersections through the study area. In addition to that, we had round-the-clock 24-hour counts on a number of roads and the highway and ramps throughout the study area. We have the Southern New Hampshire Planning Commission is on our team. They have a regional traffic model, and working with us, they were able to not only help us with the projected traffic into the future, but when we looked at each of the alternatives, we were able to look at what type of traffic diversions would occur based on the new configurations of each of the alternatives. And I'm not going to go through all these numbers here, but for all of these alternatives that we'll talk about tonight, we have traffic volumes at each of the various configurations and for each of the various alternatives. In addition to that, we put together a number of environmental and cultural resource maps that were very helpful and allowed us to look at the impacts of the various alternatives. These included, wetland resources. So, for example, here's an area. This is existing exit 7, Front Street. We'll be looking at, potential reconstruction of the ramps there. We have a wetland that runs along that section. We have another alternative that looks at relocating exit 7 and extending a crossing of the Black Brook, and you can see a wide area, wetland area up in there. So those are the things we need to consider. Historic resources is something we need to be looking at. We have, in particular, we come down to the area where between exits 5 and 6, we have the historic Mill District on the west side of 293, right through that curved area. That's an important resource we need to consider. Also with the river, both the river and the Black Brook, we need to be looking at floodway and floodplain resources. Again, right down near as you go through the river, the river is running along the entire corridor. We have a number of sensitive receptors to highway noise. Anytime you're doing a highway project, you need to be concerned with the noise effects to sensitive receptors. We've identified in the red areas, residential areas, which are important when you're considering what the impacts to those areas could be. Rare, threatened, endangered species or habitat, we've identified where those are, and again, as we move forward and look at the various impacts, we need to be considering those resources. And also hazardous waste. We've identified a number of site locations where hazardous waste has been identified, including the Manchester landfill, and there's actually a groundwater management zone that actually extends from the landfill over to the river. All of those need to be considered as we're moving forward and looking at the alternatives. I do want to say that it was back in, I think it was in September 2012, of the various meetings we had. One of them we had was a sort of an informal workshop. And at that workshop, we asked people to come in and to give their thoughts on some of the problems, issues, constraints, and even at that point start coming up with some ideas. And that really that was the beginning of how we started developing the various concepts. And so from that, and we put together a list, and this is, by the way, this is just a partial list of some of the problems and issues that were identified. It's actually much longer than this, but let me just give you a sense of the types of things that we heard at those meetings. Poor sight lines along the corridor with curves along the corridor. Queuing onto the highway with traffic from the ramps back out onto the corridor. High-speed weaving, particularly in the southbound direction at exit 6. We have heavy traffic entering and exiting in very short distances. Short on-ramps where entering the highway and there's not a lot of acceleration length, and as soon as you enter the ramp, you're onto the highway itself. Vehicle crashes, confusion, congestion up on the Amoskeag Circle. Again, as I mentioned, highway noise, limited truck access between Goffstown and the highway. congestion and safety issues at the Manchester Community College, right at the, on Front Street near the Exit 7 ramps, and limited access at Exit 7. At the existing Exit 7, there's only access to and from the south. So there are no ramps that allow you access to and from the north. So again, that's just a short list of some of the issues that were identified. So with that, let me get into the alternatives and run through these for you. First, let me say that when we look at, for these feasibility studies, we need to look at these alternatives, and we group them in these 4 areas. First off, anytime I refer to a no build, what I'm referring to is that's the do nothing alternative. So when we're comparing the impacts of the various alternatives, we always need to compare it to the no build. So the no build means we leave things alone and we don't do anything. We also look at what's called transportation demand management strategies, TDM. And what that refers to, when I talk about TDM, what that refers to is looking at possible actions that are aimed at reducing the volume of traffic out on the roadway system. And so, such things might be, you think of maybe putting in policies that could encourage, carpooling, or maybe increase transit usage, things that get people out of their cars. Also, transportation system management actions, those are actions that try to look at the existing system and try to improve the efficiency of the existing system. They tend to be relatively low cost, not major types of improvements. It might, an example might be if you had a number of traffic signals along a corridor, you may upgrade those to improve the efficiency or the coordination between the signals. Those are the types of things we talk about with transportation system management actions. And then we have the build alternatives. And tonight, frankly, I'm going to spend a little bit more, most of the time talking about the build alternatives. Those are the big, major fixes to the problems that we're talking about. So let me start first on these build alternatives. And what we've developed is conceptual build alternatives, and we've broken them out into three categories: the I-293 main line, Exit 6, and Exit 7. And for the I-293 main line, we've identified 3 alternatives: alternatives 1, 2, and 3. For Exit 6, we've identified 5 alternatives: alternatives 4, 5, 5A, 6, and 7. And for Exit 7, we have 5 alternatives as well: alternatives 8, 9A, 9B, 10A, and 10B. So let's just step through these. We're going to start first on the main line, I-293 main line. What we have is 3 alternatives. The first alternative, alternative 1, I don't actually have a picture of it because what alternative 1 is it says, can you keep the main line exactly the way it is? 2 lanes in each direction, don't leave the curves the way they are, and only look at the interchanges. Can you fix the interchanges but leave the main line exactly the way it is? That's what alternative 1 is. Now, alternatives 2 and 3, basically for anything from, say, Exit 6 north, is exactly the same. Both of them say that we're going to add a single lane in each direction. So going from 2 lanes in each direction to 3 lanes in each direction. And the only difference between alternatives 2 and 3 is down in this southern area between Exit 5 and 6. And the reason why we created 2 alternatives down in that area is because right in this curve area, we have 2 of those kind of, what I talked about, those important resources. One of them is the historic mill district, which is located right here, and the other is the river. So when we're doing these, we're identifying impacts, we need to be able to look at what are the potential impacts to the historic mill district and to the river. And so in order to identify those, we created 2 alternatives. Alternative 2 pushes towards the river, and alternative 3 pushes more to the other side. So let's take a look at these. Well, first of all, let me say, see this, when I show you this building located right here on the curve, that's this building here. Now, notice what I want to show you here is that, obviously if you start doing some widening coming towards the building here, there's not a lot of room here between the highway and the building. The alternatives that I'm going to show you, even the one that we push in this direction, doesn't take the building, But my point here with this picture is it's not just about the building. There's operations going on here. There's trucking activities. And there's also, when you have a building like this, you need to make sure that from a fire standpoint, fire apparatus can get around the building. So those are all concerns that we need to look at. So let's come back and look at this as far as the two alternatives. Alternative 2 would have this type of layout with this is looking north, with this is northbound, this is southbound. That's that building that I showed you on the west side. That kind of parking area and operations for the trucks would be over here. So alternative 2 widens towards the river, away from the west side. So alternative 2 would maintain the highway here. You'd have a clear area here because you're going around a curve, so you need to make sure there's a clear sight line there. And you have a shoulder, 3 12-foot southbound lanes. You'd have a median area, 3 northbound lanes, and a shoulder area. And notice what we've done under this alternative is actually to try to, even though we're pushing towards the river, to try to minimize the impacts to the river, we're showing a cantilevered section out over the river. And so we're trying to minimize the impacts to the river by actually extending the highway out over it as opposed to building retaining walls down into the river. If we look at alternative 3, that's the one on the bottom here, this one pushes away from the river, holds this edge at this point, still 3 lanes in each direction. You have your clear line, and here you see we're not into the building, but clearly we're into that parking area, which would obviously affect the operations of that building. So alternatives 2 and 3, all we're talking about is an extra lane in each direction, but the question is, which way do you move the highway through that particularly sensitive area? Now let's move up to exit 6. At exit 6, the issues today is you have all types of congestion and confusion up on the circle. You've got traffic that particularly this northbound off-ramp, backs out onto the highway and even around the curve in here. You've got traffic entering on the northbound ramp. There's very short acceleration length there. Once you enter the highway, you're onto the highway. In the southbound direction, you've got this tight weave here with heavy volumes exiting and heavy volumes entering at the same point. And also you have this small little ramp here at Eddy Road that once you get through this traffic, you have more traffic jumping on at that point. So those are some of the issues that we're trying to address. So let's look at the first alternative. Alternative number 4 is what's called a single-point urban interchange. The single-point urban interchange would be located here at Amoskeag Street and Goffstown Road. All of the ramps would enter directly into a single signalized intersection. It would be a very similar operation to what you have at Granite Street at exit 5. The only difference would be is that under this alternative, the interchange would be above the highway. The highway would run underneath, as opposed to at exit 5, it's the other way around, where the interchange is underneath and the highway runs above it. The way this would operate is that all of the movements and ramps would come in at a single point here. You'd have access to the city in this direction and to Goffstown in this direction. Currently today, there's a signalized intersection right here at Front Street and Goffstown Road. That intersection would be too close to this, and so you would not be able to have that. And so in order to provide all the movements and connections that we need to provide here, what we would do is have Goffstown Road would come up and enter the interchange, while Front Street would be underneath and would connect down to Eddy Road to a point somewhere around here where we'd have a second crossing overpass over the highway that would connect you to a signalized intersection here at Amoskeag Street. So what that would mean is that you would have all these connection points. It would not be at that intersection. Now, one thing I want to point out about this alternative, and it only pertains to this particular alternative, the single point, is that I mentioned earlier that we have this existing kind of little slip ramp from Eddy Road that's out there today. Under this alternative, we would propose that this access still be maintained. Now, when I say maintained, it would be, that ramp would be reconstructed, brought up to, to modern design standards. It would have a full-length acceleration lane, which it doesn't have today. But the reason why, under this alternative, we propose to provide for a connection there is that because the interchange is located up here, any of the traffic that today uses that existing ramp at Eddy Road, under this configuration, they would be forced to come up Eddy Road, come to this intersection, take a right-hand turn, get over to Amoskeag Street, take a left-hand turn at a signal, come to the new interchange, take a left-hand turn at the interchange to get on this ramp and head south. That's a long trip. What would happen, we would expect, is that without this ramp here, those people who do that today would get down to Granite Street and head more on the local streets. And the DOT doesn't want to try to solve a problem out here and end up pushing more traffic onto the local streets. And so that's the reason why we would show the need to have that so you don't force traffic down onto the local streets. The other alternative we have is alternative 5. This is called a diamond interchange. The diamond interchange would connect Eddy Road over to Amoskeag Street, and the ramps would be located right here. So you'd have all 4 ramps at this point. At the intersection at Front Street, you'd have a signalized intersection. It wouldn't connect to Eddy Road, but it would connect to Goffstown Road and to Amoskeag Street. And again, you'll notice because the ramps are located here, there is no longer a need to have that smaller ramp because any of the traffic from this area that wants to head southbound on 293 can come up and enter the highway right there. And so it's a different configuration, but under this configuration, you would not need that other ramp. Alternative 6 is a very similar layout. It's also a diamond configuration, but it's called a diverging diamond interchange. And it's laid out exactly the same way. The only difference is that this section between these 2 signals, the traffic that runs between these is actually on the opposite side of the street. It's on the left-hand side. And the reason why you do that for these configurations is it's actually more efficient. You can have a simple 2-phase signal at these 2 locations. That's the upside. That's the benefit. It's a little bit more efficient. The downside is it's a little unconventional. I don't believe there are any diversion diamond interchange. I don't think there are any in New England. They're around the country. So they're a little different. They may be confusing. So again, the benefit is they're a little more efficient. The downside is they may be confusing to Another alternative we looked at is alternative 7. Again, similar layout of diamond configuration connecting Eddy Road to Amoskeag Street, but rather than having traffic signals, it would be 2 large roundabouts. And based on the volume of traffic, those would be large roundabouts, 2-lane roundabouts, but basically the same general layout. Everything else here would be the same as the other alternative. And the last alternative we have for exit 6 is alternative 5A. We call that it's sort of a kind of an offset diamond interchange. It's sort of a combination of some of the different movements. And what that would be is in the northbound direction, you would have an off-ramp that comes into Amoskeag Street, and you'd have a northbound on-ramp that enters on this side. You would have a full intersection at Front Street, Goffstown Road, and Amoskeag Street. And then traffic, the ramps for the southbound ramps would be down here. We would come off, come into this intersection, or get on at this point. All of the traffic that comes from, say, out of Manchester and wants to head south on 293 would come down to this intersection, come in here, and rather than going through the signalized intersection, we get on a ramp over the top and then enter the highway that way. So those are the alternatives that we've looked at for exit 6. Let me just quickly step up to exit 7. This is the existing location of exit 7 at Front Street. As I said today, there were only ramps to and from the south. We want to be able to get ramps to and from the north as well. As I said earlier, what we're also looking at here is not only a addressing the problems at exit 7, but we are also evaluating the potential of relocating 7 further to the north. However, one of the alternatives is to look at, is it possible to reconfigure the interchange at its existing location? And that's what alternative 8 is. Alternative 8 tries to reconfigure the interchange, provide both ramps to and from the south, and also ramps to and from the north at its existing location. You can see it's tight there, trying to get those ramps in between the landfill and the community college, which is located right here. Also, if you remember earlier, I was talking about, the environmental resources. There's a wetland area right down in this area where we want to put in that ramp. The other thing I want to mention about the idea of reconstructing exit 7 at its existing location is you need to consider the proximity of exit 7, Front Street, to what we would do at exit 6. Those interchanges are fairly close. And what that would mean is if you reconfigure exit 7 at its existing location and reconstruct exit 6, the distance between the on-ramp here and the off-ramp here is relatively short. It's about 1,400 feet. Now, we've looked at different ways of how it would operate, and from an operational standpoint, we can get the traffic volumes to operate acceptably and safely, but in order to do that, there needs to be a relatively short section in the middle here that actually has an additional lane, a weaving lane. So when I said there were 3 lanes, there was 3 lanes in each direction, for a very short distance in here, if this interchange is here, there's actually a 4th lane. There'd be an extra 4th lane. Downside to that means that there are more impacts to the areas, to the properties to the back of Front Street and in the area of Stock Lane, because now you have a slightly wider section of corridor. So those are things, again, that need to be considered. Now, let's move up to, as I said, we've looked at a number of alternatives for relocating exit 7 further to the north. And this is the existing Front Street interchange. Up in this area, this is where we're looking at a potential for a relocated exit 7 interchange. The configuration under alternative 9A would look something like this. We would have an off-ramp and an on-ramp. And here, because of the landfill, we can't fit an on-ramp here, so it would be a loop ramp where you'd head south and you'd come from the north and get off at a location here with traffic signals at those ramps. Now, as part of putting a new interchange here, we do 2 things. One is we're going to have a connection up to Dunbarton Road, so we have connection from Dunbarton Road to the highway. And also, we need to have a connection down to Front Street, because these ramps would be gone. So we have a signalized intersection down here on Front Street, and we'd also want to make sure that we provide connections to the college and to this residential area over here. So we'd have some type of a intersection here that would provide connections to those land uses. Now, as far as this alternative is concerned, we've actually looked at 2 locations where we could possibly meet in at Front Street. This is one of them, and another one, alternative 9B, looks something like this. And it's simply a different location where you'd come into Front Street. I would tell you is that from all the analysis we've done and looking at the impacts, they're relatively similar. What it will ultimately come down to is what works best for the college and for the residential area here. And so as we move forward, we'll need to have more discussions with the abutters. But either one of those alternatives are fairly similar. Now, as I said, alternative 9 connects to Dunbarton Road going to the west. We also have looked at what we call alternative 10. Alternative 10 says, not only do you connect to Dunbarton Road, but is it possible to have a connection over to Goffstown Road and ultimately a connection to Goffstown Back Road in Goffstown. And the thinking there is that the town of Goffstown has industrially zoned land up off of Goffstown Back Road, and they're looking to have improved access to the highway. And if there's a way to do that, some connection in through here would be a way to do that. Now, as I said earlier, again, we put back some of these environmental restraints. There's a large wetland area through here. You notice that's why we kind of brought this through this area, which had the thinnest section. What I would say is that as we move into the next phase of this project, this whole idea of connecting this and how does this connect best, and should this connect into Goffstown Road, or should Goffstown Road connect into here? We really need to take a harder look of the details of that. And so the next phase, I think all of that has to be looked at a whole lot closer. But alternative 10, the difference between alternative 9 and alternative 10 is alternative 9 brings the interchange here, a connection to Front Street, but only connects to Dunbot Road. Alternative 10 takes alternative 9 but adds the crossing to Black Brook and over to Goffstown. Okay, so with that, actually, before I leave this topic of Exit 7, there's another, what we call it, economic considerations. In addition to all the other resources that we're talking about. Anytime that whether you upgrade the corridor, I-293, whether you upgrade the interchanges, Exit 6 or 7, that's going to have a benefit from just an overall regional economic benefit. Just simply the improving those interchanges. But in particular, for this study, as we work with through the advisory committee, is both the City of Manchester and the town of Goffstown have particular interest in the area near Exit 7. And the two areas that are particularly of interest is one is back a number of years ago, the City of Manchester put together a master plan, what they call the Hackett Hill Master Plan. And it's a master plan of potential area that may be built out in the future. And this area runs somewhere between Hackett Hill Road and Dunbot Road. And I'm not saying this is necessarily going to happen or this is exactly what's going to be, but the city has put together a master plan and said, well, this is an area where in the future this may be redeveloped. And we knew that going into this, and so when we laid this out, this is the Exit 7 reconfiguration. We made sure that that lines up so that if this happens, this could connect into that piece. Secondly, as I mentioned, the town of Goffstown has an industrial area up here. They would like to see in the future an opportunities to bring in businesses into that area. And they look at this as an opportunity. If we can improve the connections to 293, this would be an opportunity to do that. So again, I lay those out as those are just considerations that we need to be thinking as we're moving forward of all the advantages and disadvantages of each of the different alternatives. All right, with that, let me step through, and I'll try to do this again as quickly as possible and then summarize our findings. I want to run through the evaluation of the alternatives. So how did we looked at all those alternatives and how did we evaluate those? First, let me say that when we tried to do the evaluation, we broke it out into these areas. One was highway needs. Remember I said the study purpose is about addressing the capacity and safety issues along the corridor. So that's our primary study purpose. So obviously any alternative we need to make sure meets that study purpose. Are we actually improving capacity and safety? Also, I mentioned community needs, and primarily what we heard from communities was that economic growth is an important part of the community needs. So we tried to measure how that each alternative did for those. And then, as I said, we have all these various resource impacts that, as part of feasibility study, we need to identify all of those. So all the resource agencies has that information. So, and I know you can't see this, and I'm not going to go through this whole table. This is in the report, but this is an evaluation table that we use to try to pull all this together. And what it simply looked at is the columns have, each of the alternatives, including the no-build and the I-293 mainline alternatives, and the Exit 6 alternatives, and the Exit 7 alternatives, and down the left-hand side has, how well did we meet each of the purpose, capacity, or safety, or how well did we meet the economic benefits and all the various environmental impacts are down in here. What I'm going to do is I want to very quickly step through, I'm not going to go through all the impacts, but I want to touch on how well each one met the study purpose, capacity and safety, and how well it met the economic benefits. And so if if we first just go back and look at the main line, remember I said I-293, there were three alternatives. Alternative 1, 2, and 3. Alternative 1 was we don't do anything to the main line. We leave it alone. Just look at upgrading the interchanges. And alternatives 2 and 3 add an extra lane in each direction, but the only difference between one and the other is one pushes towards the river and one pushes in the other direction. And as I said, we always compare against the no-bill. And so we're looking for just this table. All we're looking at is, did we meet the objectives for capacity and for safety? And the way we've summarized this so you can get a sense of how you compare these is that we put a green dot in areas where we substantially meet the objective. We put a yellow dot in where we moderately meet the objective, and we put a red dot in where we either minimally or fail to meet that objective. And so if you look at the no build means we don't do anything. Under the no build, obviously, we're failing to meet the objective of improving capacity and safety, so they get rid. Under alternative A, that is, leave the main line alone and just concentrate on the interchanges. From a capacity standpoint, our analysis says that when we project traffic out 20 years from now, that won't be enough. You're going to need that additional lane. And so we would not meet the capacity criteria if you under alternative A. Obviously, if you can upgrade the problems at the interchanges, you are starting to address the safety issues, and so for that reason, from a safety standpoint, alternative A would fit into the moderately meets the objective. Now, if we look at alternatives 2 and 3, this is adding an additional lane in each direction. The only difference being which way we move to the highway. And again, all we're talking about in this table is capacity and safety. So we're not measuring it on what the impacts are to the river or the historic district. Under those, both alternatives 2 and 3 would both substantially meet the objectives of improving the capacity and improving safety. We move to the alternatives for exit 6. Again, same thing. We have a no build, and then we have each of our alternatives. Alternatives 4, 5, 5A, 6, and 7. Again, all we're doing here is measuring how well we're doing against improving capacity and safety. Obviously, under the no build, you don't do anything. We're not going to address capacity and safety. For alternative 4, that's the single point, urban interchange. Our analysis says that from both a capacity standpoint and a safety standpoint, we would substantially meet the objective under that alternative. If we look at each of the diamond configurations, the standard diamond, the offset diamond, and the diverging diamond, each of those, from a safety standpoint, would completely address the safety issues. They fall into the category of moderately meeting the objective because we can get acceptable levels of service at those intersections. However, under the diamond configurations, there are some issues with respect to queuing between the signals and some of the spacing between the signals. And so for that reason, it doesn't distribute the traffic quite as well as the single point interchange. But we would characterize those, each of those alternatives as moderately meeting the objective of capacity. And the final alternative, alternative 7, is the one with the roundabouts. And our analysis shows that from a capacity standpoint, that's not going to work. And so this is probably the last meeting you're going to hear about that alternative as far as, because it simply doesn't work from a capacity standpoint. Obviously, if it works from a safety standpoint because it would improve the situation out there today, but it doesn't work from a capacity standpoint. So let's move to up to exit 7. Again, alternatives for exit 7. Same thing. You don't do anything. You're not addressing either capacity or safety. Alternative 8 is the reconfiguring exit 7 at its current location at Front Street. And under that scenario, our analysis shows that operationally, we can make it work. Safety, it's certainly an improvement, so we put it in the category of moderately meets the objective. But what we need to keep in mind here is that issue of the spacing between exit 6 and 7. And it's not an ideal situation. Those interchanges ideally should be set further apart. And so that's why it falls into the category of moderately meeting that objective. Now, each of the alternatives of relocating the exit 7 interchange further to the north, both alternative 9, which connects to Dunbarton Road, and alternative 10, which actually goes over the river and extends over to Goffstown Road. From a capacity and a safety perspective, both of those substantially meet those two objectives. Now again, we haven't talked about the economic benefits yet. Simply from a capacity and a safety perspective, relocating the interchange further to the north meets that objective. So what I want to do here, and I'm not going to go through all of them, but from an economic perspective, and as I said earlier, any improvements to the corridor in exit 6 or at exit 7 is going to improve the economic vitality of the entire region. However, specifically part of this project, what we've heard from the City of Manchester and the Town of Goffstown is they're in particularly interested in what's happening at exit 7. So I'm going to focus here on the exit 7 alternatives, on how that falls into, from an economic consideration. And so here, what we're measuring against, not capacity and safety, but we're measuring against how, from an economic perspective, how do each of these alternatives meet the objectives of the Hackett Hill Master Plan and the improving connectivity to Goffstown. And so if we use the same method under the no build, you don't do anything, obviously we are not going to meet those objectives. If we do alternative 8 is reconstructing the interchange at its existing location. If you do that, really neither one, we're not going to be able to meet the objectives of providing improved connection to Hackett Hill because it's further to the north, or to improve the improved connectivity to Goffstown. Now if we look at alternative 9 relocates the interchange, but it only provides a connection as far west as Dunbarton Road. And so under that scenario, alternative 9 would fall into the category of, it would certainly meet the objective from providing improved access or connectivity to the Hackett Hill area, because simply relocating it, that parcel is very close to the interchange. So it would substantially meet that objective, but it would fail to meet the objective of providing improved connectivity to Goffstown, because again, we haven't crossed the river yet. Alternative 10, which extends over across the Black Brook, would obviously would have meeting the objective both from Hackett Hill standpoint and from improving connectivity to Goffstown. So that's sort of how the alternatives break down relative to how they meet the capacity, safety, and the economic considerations. So let me just very quickly touch on some costs. Going back to exit 6, and again, these are just construction costs. They don't include right-of-way costs. There's other costs involved, but we want to be able to compare apples to apples here. And so just construction costs at these interchanges, these are fairly substantial costs. The single-point urban interchange we're talking about, to construct it would be somewhere between $54 and $60 million. Each of the other diamond configurations there would run between $38 and $45 million. We come up to exit 7, reconstructing exit 7 at its existing location. That's alternative 8. Would be running between $33 and $36 million, and relocating the interchange, but not crossing the brook, just going to Dunbarton Road, would run between $36 and $41 million, and then ultimately, if you extended over across the Black Brook, the cost would be in the order of between $42 and $48 million. So that's I just want to give you a sense of the range, the type of dollars that we're talking about for these interchange upgrades. So, with that long-winded presentation, what I'm going to try to do here is just summarize for you our findings. After all of this analysis, after all the meetings we had, what does it all say to us? And then when I finish that, we're going to talk about what are the next steps and where do we go from here. So let's talk about our findings. First off, our findings were, number one, the study confirmed that there are substantial problems that need to be addressed. So again, keep in mind, this is a planning study. If we went through this process, and at the end of this study, at this point, we had concluded that although there are issues, they're really not substantial enough to spend substantial dollars, then everything would end right now. Our conclusion is no, there are substantial problems that need to be addressed. Secondly, there are a reasonable range of alternatives that can address those problems. And so again, if you think about it, we could get to this point in the planning study, we may have identified there are substantial problems, but maybe we went through all the alternatives and the result was, there's no good solutions. And again, everything would stop right here. There's no solutions. You would not proceed to the next phase. Our conclusion here is there are, in fact, reasonable alternatives to address the problems of the project. I mentioned earlier, and I didn't spend much time on it here tonight, but the TDM and the TSM, Transportation Demand Management, Transportation System Management actions, those are the smaller actions, getting people out of their cars and getting more efficient operations of the existing systems. When we move into the next phase of this study, we're going to have to look in more detail of those. But our conclusion here is those types of actions alone, by themselves, would not address the problems. Ultimately, what we're probably going to end up is that doing some of the other build alternatives, it still would be a good idea to do some of the TDM and TSM actions to improve the overall operation, but the conclusion is alone, they would not, they won't allow you to say, well, no, you don't have to build any of the other build alternatives. Along I-293 main line, between exits 5 and exit 7, and again, projecting out 20-year design horizon, you're going to need an extra lane in each direction. By the way, when you get to exit 7, at exit 7, and frankly, north of exit 7, when we project our traffic out 20 years in the future, you can actually get away with maintaining 2 lanes up in that section. So the 3 lanes is needed really south of exit 7. With this, I would point out, and our recommendation would be, even though the volumes say you only get away with 2 lanes in each direction at exit 7, if you're going to spend the kind of dollars that we're talking about to reconfigure the new interchange at exit 7, regardless of whether you put in an extra lane in each direction, you would build the interchange wide enough to accommodate an extra lane in each direction. Each of the exit 6 alternatives, with the exception of the diamond interchange with the roundabouts, operates acceptably and meets the study purpose. So that what that means is that as we move into the next phase, as I said, you're probably not going to see the alternative with the roundabouts anymore because that's really going to fall out. It doesn't work. I said the single point interchange probably operates the best of them, but the other configurations operate acceptably, and it doesn't, you may not want to throw those out just yet. At exit 7, reconfiguring exit 7 at its existing location could be problematic given the close proximity of exit 6. What that means is, I've said, our analysis shows you could reconstruct exit 7 at its existing location, and we can get acceptable operations, but it's not ideal. And there will always be an issue with the spacing between exit 6 and exit 7. Finally, relocating exit 7 to the north will meet the capacity and safety study purposes, and it will also support connectivity to the important future economic development areas, both in Manchester and Gotham. And so, everything that I talked about, those are kind of, I tried to wrap it all up. This is kind of what the study says at this point, the completion of the planning study. Those are our findings. That's what we're reporting to the New Hampshire DOT. And now let me just quickly talk about next steps, where we go from here. This process of these major infrastructure projects, like reconstructing interchanges, they go through this 3-part stage. Part A is the planning study. That's the study that we've completed. We're, at the end of this month, end of December, the planning study is done, complete with the planning study. This is the final meeting on the planning study. The next phase is what's called Part B. And that's when we take what came out, the recommendations, what came out of the study, and we move into what's called the NEPA phase, with environmental documentation and more detailed preliminary engineering. So we're really looking at each of these alternatives in much greater detail, and we're looking at the impact in much greater detail. We expect that that will start sometime around the spring of next year. And we expect that that process is going to extend between 18 and 24 months. And then if that process is successful, at the end of that, we have a project, we have something that everybody's on board with, then you go to final design after Part B, and that's Part C, and then ultimately into construction. That's the schedule. Let me just talk a little bit about Part B, and in particular, this NEPA process. Without getting into all the details of it, NEPA stands for the National Environmental Policy Act, and that's what we'll be doing going through the Plan B. And what this is about is that federal agencies must conduct an assessment of environmental effects of a proposed action. That's any of these, what we're talking about, these interchanges are proposed action, prior to final decisions being made on those proposed actions. And so I'm not going to get into all the detail, but there's a lengthy process that we go through of identifying all the impacts of these. And an important element of this next piece is that it's all done in public. And so the purpose of NEPA is not about somebody coming in and saying, this is what needs to be done. It's about that the decision makers will have those decisions made out in the open. And so the idea of NEPA is that you end up with better informed decisions and that you have public involvement in those decisions. And so when we move into the next phase, much like we did through the planning study, there will be a brand new public outreach element of this. There will be more meetings. There will be new website. There will be everything that you've seen and more in this next stage as far as making sure that everyone has an opportunity to bring in their comments. One other piece that we need to do, now that we're beyond the planning study, is that the Federal Highway Administration requires the preparation of what's called an Interchange Modification Report, IMR. And that needs to be prepared anytime a project considers the reconfiguration and potential relocation of an interstate on the interstate highway system. I-293 is on the interstate highway system. That means that we need to go through this process of preparing and submitting to the Federal Highway Administration this interchange modification report. What I would say is that the level of evaluation that we're going to do through the NEPA process is actually very similar to what needs to be done as part of the interchange modification report. And so, although they're separate, we're going to do them at the same time. The analysis is the same. And so both of those would be done concurrently as we move through Part B. And so again, just let me recap. We're completing the planning study this month. The planning study is going to be done. We're going to move into Part B, environmental documentation, preliminary engineering, and again, the interchange modification report. That will start hopefully in spring of next year, and we expect that to extend about 18 to 24 months. And then if that goes well, after Part B, you move into Part C and final design. So, Dave?
Marty, thank you for that detailed presentation. So in an effort to keep us moving right along, let me open up and transition right into the question and answer period or comment period. First, let me open it up to elected officials. If any of you folks want to come up, first give the opportunity to Mayor Gatsas if you'd like to come up and offer any comments. Okay. Senator Booten.
Thank you very much, Marty. What I would just like to do and say is that echo what Mayor Gatsas said the first meeting we had over at the Manchester Community College. And that is, and I think most of you would agree with me, that if we're going to do this, let's do it once. So let's get it right. Let's do the full solution and not a partial solution so that we have to go back and do this all over again in 5, 10 years or whatever. So I have been involved from the very outset. One of the areas that I am very concerned about, particularly noise issues for my good friends who live over Riverfront Drive. I want to make sure that this project does not affect their quality of life over there. But I am very pleased with the work that you have done, and I think you've come up with some good alternatives. And getting this project done is meaningful for two reasons. One, and most importantly, public safety. More so than economic development. Public safety. When you come around that curve and there's about 20 cars and red lights in front of you, and you got to slam your brake on, and then you got to make those moves around all those, all those Frenchmen from the west side trying to go around the Amherst Circle, you know what I'm saying? Not the Iris, not the Iris. So the point is, public safety should be number one. The economic development aspect is critical. Number two, we do need to get access over to Goffstown. I think that's very important because Goffstown Road, which goes right through the heart of Ward 12, my good friend here is here tonight, Keith Hirschman, all that traffic that goes through there, we need to get that traffic off that road so that the people who live in those neighborhoods don't have to deal with the traffic and the noise and so forth and so on. So I'm very supportive of what you've done up to now. There are some good alternatives, and I know that my good friend Councilor Pappas is here tonight, is he? Councilor is going to make sure that the money's going to be there in the 10-year plan to do Phase B, right, Councilor? I know the council's going to do it. So we'll get that done, we'll get that money in there, we'll get that done, and move forward, and I look forward to continuing to serve on the Technical Advisory Committee. So thank you very much, Marty, and great job done. Thank you.
And that's a great segue. Councilor Pappas, if would you like to come up and offer any insight? And I know we have several other elected officials. We'll also get to you folks as well.
I don't need to take any time, but just thank you for the presentation, and certainly look forward to the future phases of this as this unfolds. I think everyone here supports the concept of this and is really looking forward to kind of digging down in the details and looking at the next steps. One of the things that the council and the governor has been working on with DOT has been the 10-year transportation plan. We've submitted our draft to the governor. It includes exit 6 and 7, the rehabilitation of those exits in that plan, but it's an unfunded priority to date. And so we're going to have to make some hard decisions in the coming months in terms of this priority and how we put state resources and frankly taxpayers' resources to fund this project. So, as the Turnpike Fund exists now, there's no money to complete the rehabilitations of exit 6 and 7. So we're going to have to come up with some new money if we do determine that this is a priority that we want to move forward with. So, understanding that, it would also be helpful for me to understand from all of you, what your position on that is. Would you support a moderate increase in tolls at the Hooksett Main Line in order to finance this project? And so that's something the council is going to have to think long and hard about. But thanks again for the presentation. It's always very clear, and I think we come away with the understanding that this is an important project, and we're going to have to continue to wrestle with how we finance that in the future.
Thank you, Councilor Pappas.
Hi, good evening. Keith Hirschman. I'm a local elected official, so I'm focusing more on the nuts and the bolts of the residential aspect of the project. Everything that you have shown on your slides addresses traffic. I'm more concerned with the residents. I am endorsing personally alternative 9A for exit 7, and the reason is the impacts to the residential. There's some expensive homes along the river, so if that new interchange were to back up, I don't want those. If you went with 9B, the impact to those homes along the riverfront. Marty, are you putting that slide up? I'll put it up so they can see. Anyway, I want to thank VHB and I want to thank DOT. This is an excellent job you've done, and you've presented alternatives. And the people in my ward have been very vocal They're worried about their residential properties. So that's where my part comes in. So okay.
What did you say?
So that you're on exit 7. A is preferable
9A?
to B because A, at that bottom interchange, the new interchange, it's not going to affect the residential. And 9A gives us all the way to Dunbarton Road, which my purview, I don't go into Goffstown, but the thing that disturbed me with 10A or 10B is that there'd be possibly 5 to 6 takings of homes and land up along Goffstown Road that are all my constituents. So that is a negative impact. As far as exit 6 goes, cantilevering over the highway seems to be the more expensive but the preferable way to go, so you're not impacting the commercial buildings in my ward. And for 54 years I've been going clockwise in the rotary, and now it's flipped around, I'm going to go counterclockwise. The only piece, I spoke to Bruce, the engineer from the city, and right at Front Street, I know that's a difficult spot for you. Right there, yeah, Marty, right there. Up in that corridor of Front Street, there's many apartment buildings. I'm talking 10,000 people up in there. So what you have is we only have one school in the district, and it's up. You would have to take that right and go up Goffstown Road up into Montgomery Street, which is up in there. So all the school buses go that way. They're going to have to probably divert somehow. Front Street, that doesn't look preferable, but everything else on there does. So again, it's residential that we're worried about. Thank you. And I know Dick Dene has sent a letter in.
Yes.
And that was endorsing 9A also. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Mr. D'Alessandro?
Thank you. First of all, I want to thank everybody for showing up and paying attention to the project. This is the third time I've seen it. I saw it once in Goffstown. Councilor Pappas had a hearing here on the 10-year highway plan, so this is the third time. I think what people have to understand is the magnitude of this project and the cost associated with this project. This project is a $150 million project. $150 million. Understand that. How are you going to pay for this project is the key element here. There would have to be an increase in toll revenues. Got to be. So that's an essential ingredient if this is going to happen. The access to Goffstown is very significant. It's a significant and a vital part of this reconstruction project. So, A, it's costly, and it's always costly when you have to redo something. And initially, when we did this road, remember that little bend in the road was there because we tried to save money when we built the F.E. Everett Turnpike. So it was a cost-saving element that put us in this predicament to begin with. We have made a couple of changes here over the years, but they haven't been satisfactory because of the volume of traffic. So A, it's an expensive project. B, it's a project that has to be done, I think, for the safety of the individuals who use this road constantly. Safety is a preeminent issue, and those of you that have been following our highway problems, our highway deaths have increased this year. It's very, very problematic, and one of the reasons for that is excessive speed on these highways. Excessive speed and texting, very, very problematic. Those are things that we have to deal with. The taking of property. This is a new world in terms of the taking of property. That's a very, very expensive part of any project. Recognize that all of these ingredients come into play. As I look at this and I look at the configurations, they certainly are quite dramatic in contrast to what we have right now. It's dramatic change. Yet the access and egress that was just put in off the F.E. Everett to Manchester Granite Street, I mean, that was a great project, and I think everyone recognizes what it's done for traffic, the movement of traffic. So, I mean, you have to look at all of these things, and you want to do the thing that has the least impact on people and yet provides the best safety element for people and the best progress as far as the road is concerned. But we've got to face up to the issue. And I think we can't hide this at all. This is a very expensive project. And correct me if I'm wrong, please. But my analysis and my discussions with DOT indicate that this is a $140 to $150 million project. Okay, and you can't do it piecemeal. This thing should be done in one fell swoop because that makes the most sense for everybody. Something that's got to be done, recognize we have to pay for it, and it's the most accessible route that eventually you're going to have to come up with. I mean, each one of these designs has pluses and minuses, and in the final analysis, we'll get what you've chosen as what you perceive of as the proper design. That has to come. We have a 10-year plan. As Councilor Pappas pointed out, it's not a funded 10-year plan. It's a 10-year plan. And 10-year plans are usually 2.5-year plans. You've got enough money to do 2.5 years, and then you've got to reevaluate and do it again. But these kinds of public meetings are essential so that people get a full grasp of what they're looking at, and they must accept that there are costs associated with this. And in order to do the kinds of things that we want done, to make it, again, safer, more accessible, better traffic patterns and things of this nature, we have to be willing to accept the financial burdens. So thank you so much for what you've done. I think it's a great presentation. To all of the people who came, it's great to see people turn out. All of you should be complimented for just turning out and listening to this. We've got some people from Goffstown. I see Chick Tentis here, my dear friend from Goffstown, and some others. And former councilor is here. Nice to see you, Councilor. Is there any litigation that I missed? I do accent work. Okay. So thanks for coming out and looking at the project. That's most important. Thank you guys for allowing me to speak. Thank you.
And let me note that, and Marty did note it earlier as well, that this is not the end of the public outreach as we progress forward with our projects. This is just the culmination of the Part A, and public outreach will be an integral part to the Phase B or Part B as we progress forward as well. We'll have meetings much like this, and we will continue to engage the public and elected officials and everyone as we progress forward. So I want to clarify that for everybody. Any other elected officials that would like to come up? Welcome, Collis.
Good evening, and thank you for the presentation. It's been very helpful. I, too, have been at a couple of these. I won't take up a lot of your time. I'm Collis Adams, by the way. I'm the chairman of the Goffstown Board of Selectmen. I won't take up a lot of your time tonight. We've commented on at other public hearings and through both oral and written comments, so I'm sure that's all incorporated as part of your public record. But to touch on a couple of issues, and I couldn't agree with Senator Booten more, this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. This is a huge project. If we're going to do it, we need to do it right, and we need to do it so that it takes into account as many of the needs as possible, both with our good friends from Manchester and also in my community of Goffstown. You've spoken a lot about the alternative 7, and we continue to advocate for relocating exit 7 to the north of the landfill so as to provide more direct access to Goffstown Road and Dunbarton Road to help promote economic growth, number one, but there's also a safety aspect. When you take that traffic away from exit 6, which is very convoluted, and it's going to be quite convoluted even with the proposed or selected alternative, you take some of that traffic away and move it up to exit 7, you improve the safety aspects down at exit 6. So let's not just focus on the economic aspects of moving exit 7 north. We need to consider the safety aspects as well. So I want to make sure that I touched on that and that we consider that as well. Certainly can empathize with the residential folks, the speaker, the councilor who spoke about the impact of some of the residential homes, as well as on the west side, some of the roads, the properties that may be affected over there. I think when you get into detailed design, we can probably come up with a design that would avoid most, if not all, of those residential properties and minimize greatly the impacts to those folks. So I just wanted to keep my comments brief and again, re-emphasize that the town of Goffstown is going to advocate for a relocation of exit 7 north of the landfill, and we would hope that you would take our considerations into account, and thank you very much for the opportunity to comment.
Thank you, Collis. Any other elected officials? Okay. Anyone else like to come up, offer a comment? Sir?
Thank you very much, and I really thank our elected officials for coming here. Executive Councilor Pappas, who probably is out on a meeting every single night of the week, thank you, and our new alderman, and Senator Lieu. Probably going to be about 20 years, best case, before we're doing a ribbon cutting on this. I see accident victims every single day, and it's a real tragedy, and distracted driving is growing. These young kids, 3 years old, are texting, and every single teenager does it on one finger in a way that I can't imagine how you could even do it. So it's a real problem. When we did the airport access road, from the time of the early preliminary studies to the ribbon cutting was 14 to 16 years. And if this is not even in the highway plan at this point in time, other than it's a nice thing to do, but it's not a priority for the next 10 years, we're probably talking a long term. So is the scope of your plan such that you could add, or maybe you already have it in, I copied a lot of it, but I don't have it all, add some short-term, low-cost safety issues that could be, or safety remediation that could be done at this point? There's a lot of accidents. When you're coming down that highway at 65 miles an hour and you see red lights in front of you, it's a difficult thing to do, and if you're a young person texting, it's impossible. So for the next 20 years, when I'm, as a West Side driver, and is Senator Booton here? We people on the West Side do know how to drive around that roundabout, by the way, and Alderman Hirschman would say so. But is there any short-term measures for short money, lighting, bumps, maybe a little bit of a lane encroaching into the river so that the people can have a queuing backup area that's going to be a little less dangerous, while the big plan, one-time shot deal gets planned out and maybe funded over 20 years? That's my question here, and I would hope that you would consider adding something like that to the scope of your plan.
Yeah, in fact, let me say that we do, when I talk about the TSM, Transportation System Management Actions, there's a number of those that we've been looking at and we're continuing to look at. For example, we talked with the DOT about, maybe, what about the Exit 6 northbound off-ramp? We have the queue that comes back down onto the highway. Is there a way that maybe you could do a little bit of widening and maybe double up that lane and provide some extra storage, in the short term while we're proceeding with the study? I don't know. We're looking at those subjects. So those types of small things maybe can be done just from the safety standpoint.
And if I can clarify, and we talked about funding here briefly, but what we have in place right now in the current 10-year plan, we have an allotment of preliminary engineering funding. In essence, that would allow us to continue into the Part B, the next step, if you will, of our progression towards construction in the future. So that's critical at this point. What we talked about is not being funded is the $154 million at this point. We've got to find a solution to that. But I wanted to stress that right now we have funding that would allow us to continue along. And I know that in the draft 10-year plan that's being pushed along, that there is additional PE funding in 2016 that would support this next phase, the NEPA phase that we talked about. So that's critical at this point, and that's been identified. Okay.
John Liscars from Hooksett, New Hampshire, just a citizen's input. If you could go back to the slide just before the last one where you talked about your schedule. In the meantime, I'll talk to the funding. I respectfully disagree with Senator D'Alessandro. I think we have other options, I'm hopeful, other than the tolls. And specifically what I'm thinking of, just before your last one, where you wrapped it up, where you were talking about starting in the spring on the second phase. With regards to funding, I had the pleasure of a small gathering recently where the owner of the Common Man was talking about the large project that's going on at Exit 11. Part of that large project was the expansion of the liquor store. And so I was hopeful that with the expansion of the liquor store would also be expansion of the revenues, and potentially some of those revenues haven't already been spent and would be a good way to augment the cost on this. So I just would hope you would consider something like that and maybe get those discussions going. As far as the schedule, one thing that just caught my eye was Part B, the environmental documentation and preliminary engineering. Spring 2014, is that a start or is that the finish? That's a start. So I'm just curious about the delay between the end of the year and the spring. Is there January, February, is there any reason you can't be working during that time, or is it because the ground's got to be thawed or something?
No, what we'll be doing is closing out this current Part A and then re-engaging the consultant relative to that Part B. What we have to do is go through a contract, a scope and fee development, and then negotiation process. And so that's what, that does take time before we can kick off that Part B. That has to happen. So that does take time. It has to be approved through government council process. And so that's what would take up that 3 to 4 months time frame that we've identified there. So.
Good evening. My name is Will Stewart. I'm the Vice President of Economic Development and Advocacy for the Greater Manchester Chamber of Commerce. And on behalf of the nearly 1,000 businesses of the Greater Manchester Chamber, I'd like to offer our support for the findings of the study and again thank the state for undertaking that in VHB. Would like to note and agree with Senators Putin and D'Alessandro, and I think all of the other speakers who agree that safety is obviously the #1 priority, as well as the capacity issues that are being addressed here. They are substantial, and we do have solutions. From the Chamber standpoint, though, we would also like to add, and just ditto, what Marty talked about, the economic benefits, which we also believe are substantial and would advocate for those. With regard to Exit 6, that reconfigured that interchange, it would dramatically increase accessibility to downtown, which of course is the economic and financial services hub of our region. Exit 7 would open up access, of course, to, as we talked about, the Hackett Hill area and the industrial areas in Goffstown, which will, we hope, stimulate economic activity there as well. So that's where we stand right now, and wish the state luck, and we would advocate for our elected officials here to make this a priority, while recognizing certainly the constraints that we face statewide for infrastructure funding.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bob Walsh. I'm from Ward 4 in Manchester, State Representative, Hillsborough District 11. In the past, in this recent session of the legislature, the House voted to pass the gas tax. It was 4 cents per year for 3 solid years, a total of 12 cents on the gas tax. There has been no change to the gas tax since 1991. Think back for a minute where you were in 1991. Some of you might not have been around here. 1991. In that gas tax proposal, the first year's estimated income was $33.8 million. The second year, $66 or $67,600,000 million, and the third year is $99 million per year and for each year thereafter. That, I think, is a very good place to start with the gas tax. It didn't pass the Senate, so we're back to square one. So I'm all for this project, and I'm all for the gas tax. Thank you.
Thank you. And if I may note one thing, this is primarily expected to be a turnpike-funded project, although we are following all federal highway guidelines. There have been limited times where we've utilized federal highway funds. Exit 5 interchange on 293 was one of those for construction. Gas tax historically have not been used on turnpike facilities. But as we go forward, we will be evaluating all funding opportunities here. I know that the legislature and the folks from the DOT and other groups will be looking for all the solutions that are feasible to support projects like these and many others that we have on our turnpike facilities as well. So, and throughout the state, it's not simply a turnpike issue. So, thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen.
My name is Kevin McHugh. I'm a citizen of Manchester. I also serve on the planning board. And back in 2000, we had a presentation made to the planning, I believe the City of Alderman, regarding the Hackett Hill development. And it was made at that point, it was made to the board that it was a very important part of what the city was going to look like for development in the next 10 to 15 years. We're still talking 13 years ago. We still haven't seen any development up there because of a variety of issues. And I believe one of the main problems that we were facing was the fact that it was not good access off the highway. This project will allow the city to develop this land. I know there's been a lot of controversy over some of the environmental concerns up there, but as a city, we really need this type of development to increase our economic base. Manchester is probably the only land left in Manchester that we can develop to increase that base, that tax base that we need to survive as a city, to pay for the services that we require, and to alleviate a lot of the financial conditions that we have in the city today. So anything that the state can do to help us expedite this process. I know funding is always an issue. It always will be an issue with these type of projects, but any way we can possibly do this and then as soon as possible will certainly help the city of Manchester. I agree with the fellow from Goffstown, the selectman from Goffstown, to expand the exit above exit 7 to go north of the exit, because that was in the original master plan. That was the purpose, was to try to develop the industrial part of that by having 2 accesses to the park, one off Dunbarton Road, one off Hackett Hill Road, and that was the best way to do it. It alleviated some of the congestion over on exit 6, but it certainly was the best way to go. So just from my own personal view, in order for the city to develop even more as a city, and to develop that tax base, this is a highly necessary type of project that we need. So thank you very much.
Thank you for your support.
Thank you very much. My name's Christine Duffley. I'm here with my husband. We're residents of Straw Road, and we're also 2 accidents on the circle itself within a year. Both my daughter and I were back-ended, and my daughter's thing is still pending. So we have a vested interest in seeing some safety. But what's obvious is that we do need some short-term things, better signage. Can't even get the grass cut over there sometimes. I've called the highway and they say, well, it's the state. If we could really make some short-term goals to better big yield signs, light it up, and then if we could start raising funds by getting some state troopers out there, slowing down the people. It was already pointed out, someone else said, they're flying through at 65, sometimes 70 miles an hour. Steve and I are back and forth at least 4 or 5 times a day. And I'm on that circle all the time. People don't yield. We really need to look at some short-term, because we're looking very far down the road. So I don't want to get rear-ended again, and it gets really nerve-wracking, because I'm on that circle, like I said, at least 4 times a day, sometimes more, picking up kids, doing whatever. So if we could get some short-term goals, I don't know who else would agree with me, better signage, cops out there. Let's start raising the money. Let's hand out tickets. Anything we can do, or even making better signs to warn people about that. It's just one sign, slow traffic, with that on the right. I'd like to see some of that lit up here, and this is all great, but as we know, it takes time, and it takes a lot of money. So I want to thank you for what you did, but I want to be practical, and I don't want to get another accident.
Thank you. Okay, well, I don't see any more folks with any comments to share, so I'll close out the meeting tonight. I do want to thank a lot of folks. It hasn't been it's been a large group that's helped progress this project forward to this stage. The folks, the Technical Advisory Committee, have been a great group to work with. We've worked with Manchester Community College. They've hosted a lot of our events and a lot of our meetings. City officials from both Manchester and Goffstown have been very engaged with us. So clearly a group effort, and it will be necessary to be a group effort as we go forward. So in closing, I just again want to thank you all for coming out tonight, and I'm sure we'll see you folks again in the future on this project. So thank you.
Thank you.